The chandelier above me threw fractured light across the ballroom, 1,000 shards of crystal glittering against the polished wood floor. My dress clung uncomfortably to my skin, satin navy, chosen for what was supposed to be a celebration, a testament to 15 years of marriage. Instead, my hands trembled inside my lap as I watched my husband, Darren Grant, step confidently to the microphone, his jaw sharp under the glow of stage lights, his voice carrying with the same authority he used in courtrooms. 150 guests sat waiting for the toast glasses raised, smiles frozen in anticipation. Darren's gaze swept over the crowd, then landed on me, and his words cracked open my chest like glass hitting tile. After 15 years, he said, his voice steady, his tone casual like announcing a business deal. I think it's time I move on, with someone younger. For a moment, the room did not breathe. Forks froze mid-air. A gasp from the far table broke the silence, followed by the muffled click of a phone camera starting to record. My ears rang as if I had plunged underwater, but my eyes, sharp and unwilling to blink, followed the direction of his hand as it gestured toward the side of the stage. There she stood, barely 20 years old, her skin glowing with youth, her hair falling in loose waves. Chloe Evans. The name ripped through me like a shard of ice. Not just any girl. Not just the intern I had suspected. She was Chloe, the girl I once held at her baptism, the child I had promised to guide as her godmother when her own mother, my dearest friend, had begged me to step into that role all those years ago. The ground tilted beneath me. Darren's betrayal was knife enough, but this was betrayal sown with history tangled with innocence, a cruelty so sharp it burned. And the cruelest twist of all, Chloe didn't know. She stood smiling nervously as if she were just a young woman swept into a man's orbit, unaware that the woman her lover's voice was cutting down tonight was the same woman who had signed her christening certificate, the same woman who had whispered promises to protect her when she was only days old. My breath tasted of copper metallic and heavy in the back of my throat. Celeste, my mother-in-law, sat beaming in the front row, pearls at her throat, her eyes glistening with satisfaction. She had orchestrated this as much as Darren had. I could see it in the triumphant tilt of her chin, in the cruel curve of her lips as she watched me burn under the spotlight. The whispers swelled through the room, rising like a tide. Is he serious with her? God! She's so young. My heart pounded so hard I feared it might burst, but my mind was suddenly terrifyingly clear. 15 years of sacrifice. 15 years of swallowing pain, of pretending the bruises were accidents, of living with the barbs of Celeste's tongue and the weight of an empty cradle. 15 years of believing loyalty meant love. And this was my repayment: public humiliation staged under glittering chandeliers, recorded by every glowing phone screen around me. I could have crumbled then. I could have bowed my head, let the shame wash me out to sea. That was what Darren wanted. That was what Celeste prayed for. That was what Chloe, poor naive Chloe, thought would happen. But my body did not fold. My fingers reached for the stem of my glass, then steadied against the tablecloth. I pushed back my chair, the scrape echoing loud against the silence, louder even than Darren's smug smile. I walked to the stage, each step deliberate, the hem of my gown whispering against the floor. My pulse thundered, but when I reached for the second microphone, my hand no longer shook. I turned to the crowd, faces wide-eyed, breaths caught, and then back to Darren, his smirk faltering as he realized I was not retreating but rising. My voice cut through the air, low but steady, a blade wrapped in velvet. Darren, you betrayed me, I said, the words ringing sharper than the crystal overhead. Then I turned to Chloe, her wide eyes uncomprehending, her youth glowing like a lantern against the dark. And Chloe, you have no idea what you've stepped into. The ballroom exhaled all at once, the first ripple of chaos breaking, cameras lifted higher, every soul waiting for what would come next. 15 years ago, life had looked so different. I was 22 when I married Darren, wide-eyed, still carrying the fragile optimism of a young woman who believed in promises spoken under candlelight. Back then, he was ambitious, but not yet powerful, a junior associate at the law firm, his suits too big on his frame, and his confidence a mask for insecurity. We moved into a modest condo near Boston Harbor, its brick walls cold in winter, but to me it was a palace because it was ours. I told myself love was enough. For years, I played the role perfectly. I ironed his shirts, memorized his hearing schedules, made his favorite dinners after long days, and cheered every rung he climbed on the ladder. Each celebration, each promotion seemed to prove our sacrifices were worth it. But the sacrifices were always mine. When I wanted to pursue writing a dream tucked deep inside since childhood, he smiled and said maybe later when things were more stable. Later never came. Celeste. My mother-in-law never let me forget the one thing she considered my ultimate failure. No children, she would sigh during holidays, her hand heavy on Darren's shoulder. A man needs a legacy, Isabella. Women who can't give that are incomplete. The word would hang like smoke in the room, and Darren never corrected her. He would simply sip his wine, his silence its own agreement. Still, I tried. We tried. Doctor's appointments, fertility tests, long nights of whispered hope that dissolved into tears. After a while, hope became another silence we both lived inside. And Celeste's voice grew louder. He deserves better. He deserves more. Through it all, I clung to fragments of normal life. I hosted dinners, arranged flowers on the balcony, polished the hardwood floors until they gleamed. I convinced myself that appearances could hold us together, that stability was as good as happiness. When Darren worked late, I told myself he was building our future. When he came home cold, smelling faintly of perfume that was not mine, I ignored the pit in my stomach and told myself I was imagining things. It wasn't until one afternoon a year ago that the cracks became undeniable. I found receipts in his briefcase, expensive jewelry from a boutique on Newberry Street spa weekends I had never attended. When I asked him, his face twisted and his hand closed around my wrist with enough force to leave bruises the color of violets. His apology afterward was hollow, a script he had memorized. I told myself it was the first time that it wouldn't happen again. But deep down, a voice I had buried for years whispered the truth: I was not his partner. I was his shadow. I thought back to Chloe then, though I didn't realize why. I remembered holding her when she was just a baby, her tiny hand curling around my finger. Her mother's face, pale from illness but filled with trust as she asked me to be her daughter's godmother. "Promise me you'll look out for her," she had whispered. I had promised, and for a while, after her mother passed, I tried. Letters, birthday cards, the occasional phone call, but life, my marriage, my battles, my quiet despair pulled me away. I had not seen Chloe in years. So when Darren introduced her to me months ago as just an intern from the office, I hadn't placed her face at first. Youth does that, it changes someone so completely. I smiled politely, shaking her hand, telling her she had a bright future. My chest ached with something I couldn't name. And now, standing in that ballroom, I knew why. The truth had been waiting in the shadows, waiting for this moment to reveal itself. Darren thought he was humiliating me. Celeste thought she had finally won. But I saw it differently. They had set the stage, and soon it would be my turn to speak. The night after the anniversary party, I sat alone in the condo's kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My satin dress lay crumpled across a chair, its shimmer dulled by the weight of humiliation. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Darren's smug smile, Chloe's confused face, Celeste's triumphant nod. My chest still ached where my heart had clenched so tightly, but what hurt worse was the gnawing awareness that this was not a mistake. This was deliberate. He had chosen to wound me publicly. The next morning, Darren didn't come home. By noon, Celeste appeared at the door with a folder of papers. She didn't bother stepping inside. "Divorce is cleaner if you don't drag this out," she said, her perfume sharp as ever. She thrust the folder into my hands, drafted petitions already signed by Darren requesting the condo and a significant portion of our savings. "You'll save yourself embarrassment by agreeing. Be a lady about it." I stared at her, the disbelief mixing with fury, my fingers trembling over the embossed letterhead. "This condo is mine," I managed to whisper. "I bought it before we married." Celeste's smile widened, eyes narrowing with cruelty. "Courts side with men who build futures, not women who cling to pasts. Darren's career is everything. You are nothing. Sign the papers, Isabella, or I promise you you'll regret it. She turned and left the click of her heels echoing down the hall like the closing of a cell door. My knees buckled and I sank into the nearest chair, the papers fanning across the table like sharp blades. That afternoon, my phone lit up with a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was a video clip. My fingers hesitated before pressing play. The grainy footage showed Darren and Chloe walking hand in hand down Newberry Street, Chloe laughing Darren's arm possessively around her. My throat closed as I watched him kiss the top of her head, the same gesture he once reserved for me when I was young and naive. The text that followed was worse. Thought you should see what he's been up to for months. I stared at the message, my pulse racing. Who had sent it? A stranger, a friend, or perhaps someone inside Darren's own circle who finally had enough of his arrogance. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the balcony overlooking the harbor. The sky bruised purple with the weight of an approaching storm. My phone buzzed again. Another clip this time, Darren's voice, muffled but unmistakable, recorded in a restaurant. Once I get her to sign, everything is mine. She'll have nothing but memories. Chloe deserves better than scraps, and Celeste will make sure Isabella doesn't put up a fight. The glass slipped in my hand, red wine staining the balcony tiles like blood. My body shook not from fear this time, but from something sharper, cleaner. Rage. For 15 years, I had endured silence. I had endured bruises, endured whispers, endured being dismissed. But this was not silence anymore. This was theft. This was betrayal sharpened into a weapon meant to erase me. And I would not vanish. I gathered the papers Celeste had left and shoved them into a drawer. I opened my laptop and began pulling bank statements, credit card records, receipts. My fingers flew, shaking but determined. If Darren wanted war, then I would fight on ground he never expected. At midnight, my phone buzzed once more. This time it was Candace, my old friend from graduate school. We hadn't spoken in years, but her voice message was urgent. Izzy, I don't know if you know, but I saw Darren with Chloe outside the Prudential Center. I think he's trying to humiliate you. Please call me back. Her words cracked open the last piece of denial in me. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated. Darren wasn't going to stop until I was erased from the life I had built. And suddenly I understood with terrifying clarity, my fight wasn't just to protect myself. It was to reclaim the truth of who I was before they stripped it away completely. The storm outside broke, then rain pelting against the windows, thunder splitting the sky. I stood there in the flickering light, drenched in fury and resolve, and whispered to the empty room, "You wanted a fight, Darren. Now you'll get one." The following week unfolded like a performance staged by my enemies. Darren returned to the condo once not to speak, but to collect suits and cufflinks, moving about with the air of a guest rather than a husband. He didn't look at me. He didn't apologize. Instead, he left a note on the kitchen counter, scribbled in his slanted legal hand. "Be reasonable, Isabella. Don't make this ugly." The words bled arrogance, as though the public betrayal and the divorce papers weren't already hideous. Then came Celeste. She phoned daily, her voice syrupy with false concern. "Sweetheart, you need to accept reality. Darren has moved on. Don't embarrass yourself by fighting what's already done." She laced each call with veiled threats, reminders of her connections in town, insinuations that the firm's reputation could crush me if I resisted. Sometimes she sighed dramatically, as if my very existence was an inconvenience to her carefully curated social circle. "It's unbecoming, Isabella, clinging to a man who doesn't want you. Let him be happy, and sign those papers." But the worst aggressions came not from words, but from silence. At Sunday dinner, where I forced myself to appear, if only to remind them I hadn't disappeared. Darren sat at the head of the table, Celeste at his side, Chloe 2 seats down. My chair was pushed to the far corner near the swinging kitchen door. When I tried to speak, the clatter of silverware drowned me out. When I asked for water, the server ignored me until Celeste waved a dismissive hand. At one point, Chloe, with her wide eyes and nervous smile, leaned toward Darren, whispering something. Celeste's laugh rang sharp across the table, cutting into my skin like glass. "Youth has such energy," she announced to no one and everyone. "So refreshing compared to the tired." Her eyes pinned me as she lifted her wine glass. The family chuckled politely, their laughter rehearsed complicit. My throat burned, but I refused to look away. Later that night, Darren cornered me in the driveway, his breath thick with whiskey. "Stop resisting," he hissed, fingers digging into my arm. "You're making this worse for yourself. Everyone knows you're unstable. If you keep fighting, I'll make sure the court believes it too." His grip tightened, a cruel echo of other nights, until I yanked free and stared at the purple mark blooming on my skin. He smirked, satisfied, and walked back into the house. The passive war escalated outside the family as well. Our joint accounts began to bleed money charges at expensive restaurants, weekends, at luxury hotels, designer gifts purchased without my knowledge. When I called at the bank to question the withdrawals, I was met with rehearsed politeness. "Your husband has full access, Mrs. Grant." I hung up my pulse, hammering in my ears. And still, they acted as though I were the unreasonable one. Neighbors who had once greeted me with warmth now averted their eyes. At the grocery store, I overheard whispers. She must have driven him away. The narrative Darren and Celeste were weaving spread faster than the truth could run. Yet beneath their smiles and manipulations, I saw something they didn't expect. Every barb, every bruise, every humiliation was sharpening me. They mistook my silence for surrender. What they didn't see was that I was already building my case thread by thread, document by document. The more they pressed, the clearer it became if I didn't strike back, they would erase me completely. That night alone in my room, I traced the outline of the bruise on my arm, the skin tender beneath my fingertips. My reflection in the mirror looked foreign eyes, hollowed lips pressed thin, but behind that exhaustion something new flickered. Not despair, not fear, resolve. They wanted me silent, but I had finally found my voice. I began my hunt the way any lawyer's wife would quietly, methodically, leaving no trace. Darren and Celeste thought I was fragile, a woman too broken by humiliation to lift her head. That illusion was my shield. The first step was financials. At midnight, while the condo lay silent, I logged into our shared bank accounts. Passwords Darren assumed I never remembered came to me as easily as breathing. Years of watching him work, of balancing statements when he couldn't be bothered, had taught me more than he realized. I downloaded 3 years of statements, each PDF, another nail waiting for the coffin. The patterns leapt off the page: luxury hotels and Manhattan dinners for two at Michelin-starred restaurants, jewelry purchases that had never touched my skin. One line item nearly sent me reeling: $8,700 at a spa in Palm Beach, charged the same week Darren claimed he was in trial. I tagged each charge folder after folder, filling with proof of infidelity and financial misconduct. Next came the condo. Celeste's smug claim that it could be stripped from me gnawed at my stomach, but I knew better. I pulled out the original deed, carefully stored in my filing cabinet. The date was clear: 3 years before I had ever met Darren. Paid in full with the inheritance from my grandmother. Separate property under Massachusetts law. Untouchable. I scanned the deed, highlighted the critical sections, and placed them in a folder labeled Defense. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint pulse of control return. Still, control was fragile. One evening, I caught Darren rifling through my desk drawers, his hands too quick, his smirk too practiced. Looking for something, I asked from the doorway, my voice steady despite the thrum in my chest. He turned slowly, holding one of my empty folders. "Don't play games, Isabella. You'll only lose." His words dripped with disdain. He left the folder on the desk, brushing past me with deliberate force, his shoulder knocking mine. That night, I moved my documents to a safe deposit box at the bank, the steel vault swallowing my secrets whole. Candace became my silent ally. We met at a small cafe near the harbor, its windows fogged from steaming cups of coffee. She slid her phone across the table, eyes burning with loyalty. "I've been recording whenever I see them," she whispered. The videos she captured were damning. Darren kissing Chloe outside a bookstore. Darren handing her a velvet box, Chloe slipping a diamond bracelet onto her wrist with shy delight. Each clip was a shard of truth that Darren could not deny. But the most powerful weapon came from Chloe herself. One afternoon, while Darren was at work, my phone buzzed with an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line: "I think I've made a mistake." My breath caught as I opened it. Chloe's words spilled across the screen, shaky and uncertain. She admitted she hadn't known about me at first. Darren had painted me as bitter, unstable, clinging to a marriage already over. She confessed he had promised her a future, whispered that I would sign everything away quietly. I don't know what to believe anymore, she wrote. He says you're cruel, but you don't look cruel. You look hurt. Attached was a photo she'd taken on her phone. Darren's handwritten notes, scribbled plans for the divorce. Bullet points about asset transfer and sell condo immediately. My hands shook as I read, torn between fury and pity. Chloe was young, naive, caught in Darren's web, but innocence did not erase betrayal. Still, her message was evidence, and I saved it with the others. The bruises on my arm became their own kind of proof. I photographed each mark, time-stamped them, stored them alongside medical records from years past the accidents I had endured but never reported. This time, they would not be accidents. They would be testimony. Days blurred into nights as I built my case. My condo transformed into a war room. Folders lined the dining table. Infidelity, financial misconduct, property deed, domestic abuse. Each stack grew taller, my resolve hardening with it. Every document I added felt like laying a brick in a fortress they could not breach. Still, fear crept in. One night, as rain lashed against the windows, I received a voicemail from Celeste. Her voice was cold-cutting. You think paperwork will save you, courts? Listen to credibility, Isabella. And you have none. Darren will testify. Chloe will testify. Everyone knows you're unstable. Don't embarrass yourself further. The message ended with a sharp click as though she had hung up with satisfaction. I saved the voicemail too. Evidence never blinks. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed strategy, someone who knew how to wield the truth like a blade. That's when I called Leah Carter. We hadn't spoken in months. Life distance, pride had gotten in the way, but Leah had always been more than a friend. She was a force, a sharp attorney with a spine of steel. When she answered, her voice was cautious. Izzy, it's been a while. Leah, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes, though I refused to let them fall. I need your help. Darren is trying to take everything, and I have proof, so much proof, but I don't know how to fight him. There was a pause, heavy but not cold. Then Leah's tone shifted, firm and unyielding. Meet me tomorrow morning. Bring everything. If Darren thinks he can erase you, he's forgotten who you are. We'll remind him. I exhaled for the first time in weeks. My hands gathered the folders, pressing them to my chest like armor. For 15 years, I had been silent. For 15 years, I had been erased. But now, with evidence stacked higher than their lies, I was ready to be heard. The storm inside me was no longer fear. It was fire. And Darren, Celeste, even Chloe, they had no idea how hot the flames would burn. Leah's office smelled faintly of leather and coffee. The kind of rich scent that seemed to ground me the moment I stepped inside. She stood as I entered, her tailored blazer sharp against the morning light spilling through tall windows. For a moment, the weight on my chest eased. Here was someone who knew the battlefield Darren had dragged me onto. Someone who had chosen to stand with me. I laid the folders on her desk one by one, the paper edges cutting faintly into my fingers. It's all here, I whispered. Bank statements, property deeds, photos of bruises, videos from a friend, even a message from Chloe. My voice cracked on the last word, and Leah's sharp eyes flickered with surprise. She reached out to you, she asked. I nodded. She doesn't realize who I am to her. She thinks I'm just the bitter wife Darren described, but she's beginning to doubt him. That email, it could be enough to show his manipulation runs deep. Leah flipped through the evidence, her lawyer's precision dissecting each page. When she reached the photo of my arm, her jaw tightened. Did you report this? No, not yet. You need to. The court won't just look at property, they'll look at conduct. And this, she tapped the photo, is conduct that can't be ignored. I hesitated, the memory of Darren's whispered threats still raw. Unstable. No one will believe you. But Leah's voice cut through my doubt. Isabella, you've been surviving in silence for 15 years. Enough. Now we make them listen. She outlined the path with calm certainty. First, we file for a restraining order based on the abuse. The photos, the medical records, and that voicemail from Celeste will support your claim. Then we establish the condo as your separate property. The deed predates your marriage under Massachusetts law. It's untouchable. Third, we highlight Darren's financial misconduct. The hotel stays the jewelry, the spa trips. He's misused marital funds to support his mistress. Courts take that very seriously. Her pen scratched against a yellow legal pad, notes flowing like strategy lines on a map. With Chloe's email, we can even demonstrate manipulation of a younger woman, which undermines his credibility. Combine that with Candace's videos, and Darren's entire narrative collapses. I watched her, a mixture of awe and gratitude swelling inside me. "Do you think I can win?" Leah looked up, her gaze steady. "This isn't just about winning, Izzy. This is about reclaiming your life. Darren and Celeste have spent years convincing you that you're powerless. The evidence says otherwise. You are not powerless. You are prepared." Her words cracked something open inside me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like more than a shadow. We spent hours combing through the evidence, categorizing, cross-referencing, rehearsing how each piece could be presented. Leah's confidence was infectious. She even smiled once, a sharp glint of humor in her eyes. "You've done half my job for me. Most clients bring a box of chaos. You brought a fortress." When I confessed the fear still coiled in my stomach, she leaned forward, her voice softer. "Fear doesn't make you weak, Izzy. Fear makes you careful, and careful is how we win." Before I left, she handed me a small recorder. "From now on, document everything. Every call from Celeste, every word from Darren. If he so much as breathes a threat, we'll have it. Evidence never blinks." That phrase lodged in my chest, a steady drumbeat of resolve. Evidence never blinks. Walking out of Leah's office, clutching the recorder in one hand and my folders in the other, I felt taller somehow, as if the weight I carried had transformed into armor. The city streets hummed around me, honking taxis, distant sirens, the salty bite of the harbor wind, but for once I didn't feel small. Darren thought he had written my ending. Celeste thought she had orchestrated my erasure. They had no idea that I had allies now that their every move was about to be dragged into the light. As I hailed a cab, Leah's voice echoed in my mind. "This is about reclaiming your life." And for the first time, I believed her. 2 weeks later, I stood in the wood-paneled office of Josephine's executor, the scent of old books and lemon polish heavy in the air. My late aunt had always been eccentric, traveling the world with trunks of silk scarves and journals full of poetry, but she was also fiercely private. When she passed 5 years earlier, I mourned deeply but never asked about her estate. She had never married, never had children, and I assumed her assets had gone to charity. The executor, a kindly man with round glasses and a voice like warm gravel, slid a thick envelope across the desk. "Mrs. Grant, your aunt was clear in her wishes. She left this trust to you alone. It's taken some years for everything to clear, but the assets are now fully yours." My hands shook as I opened the packet. The numbers stared back at me: investments, real estate holdings, and liquid assets totaling nearly $3.8 million. My throat tightened. For a moment, the world tilted on its axis. I had come here bracing for a small inheritance, perhaps a few heirlooms. Instead, my aunt had handed me the kind of independence Darren and Celeste believed I would never have. The executor cleared his throat. "There are stipulations. The funds are in a protected trust under your sole name. They cannot be touched by your husband or considered marital property. Your aunt anticipated you might need a measure of security." He gave me a knowing look, as if he understood the bruises I'd never spoken of. I walked out of that office with the packet pressed to my chest, the spring air of Boston sharp against my face. My legs trembled as I descended the marble steps, but inside a new strength took root. For 15 years, I had been financially tethered to Darren, dependent on his income, his career, his reputation. Now I held freedom in my hands. That evening, I spread the documents across my dining table, the glow of a single lamp illuminating numbers that glittered like salvation. I called Leah, my voice barely steady. "You won't believe this. My aunt, she left me a trust. Nearly $4 million. Protected." There was a long pause. Then Leah's laugh, short, triumphant. "Izzy, this changes everything. Darren's entire strategy rests on control. With this trust, he has none. You're not just defending yourself anymore. You're negotiating from power. Power." The word rolled across my tongue, like something foreign, dangerous, intoxicating. For years, I had been cornered, every decision filtered through Darren's approval, every expense scrutinized. Now, for the first time, I could breathe without asking permission. I began to imagine possibilities. I could walk away tomorrow, sign nothing, and still be secure. I could rebuild my life brick by brick without a cent from Darren. The thought was liberating and terrifying, because I also knew Darren. If he discovered this trust, he would stop at nothing to discredit me, to twist it into another weapon. So I kept it quiet, sharing the knowledge only with Leah. Together, we wove it into our strategy. "We'll hold it as our ace," she said. "If Darren pushes for financial ruin, we reveal that you're untouchable. Courts respect independence, and Celeste will lose her leverage." That night, I stood by the window of my condo, the city lights glittering below, and felt something shift deep in my bones. For years, I had been surviving. Now I was preparing. Darren thought I was cornered. Celeste thought I was broken. Chloe thought I was invisible. None of them knew that I carried a fortune in my back pocket, a shield my aunt had built for me long before I understood I would need it. I whispered into the night, my voice steady at last. "You wanted me erased. Instead, I'll outlast you." Leah called it building the stage. I called it survival. Either way, every move from that point was calculated, each thread pulled with care until the tapestry of Darren's lies began to unravel on my terms. We knew Darren and Celeste were planning something of their own. Candace overheard whispers at a country club brunch, a grand dinner party at Celeste's Beacon Hill townhouse. Darren would announce his new chapter with Chloe, finally painting me as the unstable, bitter wife who refused to let go. They wanted witnesses, socialites, business partners, old family friends. They wanted to humiliate me publicly, cement the narrative before the divorce hit the courts. Leah's eyes glittered when I told her. "Perfect. Let them build their audience. We'll bring the show." We spent days choreographing my steps. I gathered every piece of evidence into sleek leather folders labeled discreetly infidelity, financial misconduct, abuse property. Candace prepared her recordings on a flash drive. Leah drafted motions timed to file the following morning, ensuring any denial Darren attempted would collapse under sworn statements. But the most delicate part was Chloe. She was still wavering, sending me tentative emails late at night, confessions of confusion, guilt, fear. Leah advised caution. "She's young, Izzy. She could crack under pressure, but if she's willing to admit Darren's manipulation even just in front of others, it will be devastating to his credibility." I wrote Chloe back, choosing every word carefully. "You deserve the truth. He's using you the way he's used me. You don't have to be his pawn. But you need to decide if you want to stand in the light or remain in his shadow." I didn't know if she'd respond, but the seed was planted. The night before the dinner, I rehearsed in front of my bathroom mirror. Not the words, they would come naturally, but the posture. Shoulders back, chin lifted, voice steady. For 15 years, I had curled inward, silenced by shame and bruises. Tomorrow, I would stand taller than ever, not just for me, but for every woman told she was too dramatic when she cried out. Leah sat with me until midnight, spreading documents across my dining table like a general mapping a battlefield. "You'll walk in calm, polite, gracious even. Let them think you're defeated. When Darren starts his performance, you reveal the truth, one folder at a time. No screaming, no chaos. Just fact after fact until he drowns in them." I asked her what would happen if Darren snapped, if he tried to grab me, silence me. Leah's answer was simple. "Then we record it. Evidence never blinks." As I lay in bed, sleep refusing to come, I thought of Aunt Josephine. She had always told me, "There's a strength in silence, Izzy, but one day you'll need to turn that silence into thunder." Tomorrow would be that day. When dawn broke, I dressed with deliberate care. A navy dress, modest but commanding, pearl earrings my grandmother's, hair pinned in a low chignon. I wasn't dressing for Darren or for Celeste or even for Chloe. I was dressing for the woman I had buried under their scorn. Before leaving, I opened the safe deposit envelope one more time, running my fingers over the trust documents. My final insurance. They thought they could erase me financially. They had no idea I was already untouchable. The cab ride to Beacon Hill felt like a march to war. Yet, as the townhouse loomed ahead, its windows glowing with laughter and clinking glasses, I felt no fear. Only focus. The stage was theirs, yes. But the performance, the ending that would belong to me. Beacon Hill shimmered that night. Celeste's townhouse glowed like a lantern in the darkness, its grand windows spilling light onto cobblestoned streets polished by an earlier rain. The air was thick with perfume and cigar smoke, the chatter of Boston's old money weaving through the spring breeze. I stood on the front step, one gloved hand clutching my folder so tightly the leather cut into my palm. For 15 years, I had been the silent wife, the shadow at Darren's side. Tonight, I would no longer be silent. Tonight, I would be heard. A butler I didn't recognize opened the door, his face impassive. Inside, the foyer gleamed with marble tiles and gold-framed mirrors. Guests milled in silk and tuxedos, laughter floating above the clink of champagne flutes. I caught a whiff of Celeste's signature perfume, something sharp, cloying, expensive. My stomach tightened. She spotted me first. Celeste descended the staircase in a glittering gown of emerald green, her pearls catching the light. Her smile was a knife. "Isabella," she drawled, voice thick with false warmth. "How brave of you to come." The words floated through the crowd, gathering whispers like bees to honey. Before I could answer, Darren emerged at her side. His suit was tailored within an inch of arrogance, his hand clasping Chloe's. She wore a satin slip dress far too bold for her age diamond bracelet winking at her wrist. My bracelet, the one I had found charged to our joint account. My heart twisted, but I forced my breathing steady. Darren raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, his voice booming with practiced charisma. "Thank you for joining us tonight. This isn't just a celebration, it's a new beginning. For too long, I've been chained to the past, but now I step into the future with the woman I love." He pulled Chloe forward. Gasps rippled through the room. Some faces softened with admiration, others stiffened with judgment. Celeste clapped her hands lightly, her eyes never leaving me. The humiliation was meant to crush me. Instead, it crystallized my resolve. I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the marble, the sound echoing louder than any applause. The room stilled. "Funny," I said, my voice calm-measured. "You speak of chains, Darren, but let's talk about who forged them." Dozens of eyes turned. Darren's smirk faltered. "Isabella, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time I cut in." I lifted the first folder, black leather gleaming under the chandelier. "You want to introduce Chloe as your future. Then let's make sure she and everyone here understands your past." I opened the folder and began pulling out papers, each one a dagger. Hotel receipts in Manhattan, jewelry purchases in Paris, spa trips in Palm Beach, all charged to our marital account. Over $72,000 in a single year. Funds you claimed were for business travel. I held up one receipt. Funny how business always seems to involve champagne suites and couples massages. A murmur spread through the room. Darren's face flushed. "This is nonsense," he barked, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I reached into the folder again. "Oh, and here, videos. Courtesy of a friend who happened to see you kissing Chloe outside a bookstore. Or perhaps the one where you slid that bracelet onto her wrist." I glanced at Chloe, whose cheeks blazed crimson. "Stop it," Darren hissed. "You're humiliating yourself." I locked eyes with him. "No, Darren. For 15 years you humiliated me in silence. Tonight I speak." The second folder snapped open. "This," I said, holding up the deed to my condo, "is proof that the home you and your mother swore you'd take from me has nothing to do with you. Purchased 3 years before our marriage, paid in full with my grandmother's inheritance. Separate property. Untouchable." I laid the deed on a nearby table with deliberate care. "So, Celeste, when you told me I'd be thrown into the street, perhaps you should have done your homework." Gasps again. Celeste's smile froze brittle as glass. The third folder, this one heavier, slid open with a thud. "And then there are the bruises." I pulled out photographs one after another, each time stamped, each mark undeniable. My voice wavered, but I pressed on. For years, I told myself they were accidents, that if I was quieter, gentler, he wouldn't snap. But silence protects no one. So tonight, I end the silence. The crowd shifted uneasily, the glint of scandal curdling into something darker, pity, horror, judgment. Darren lunged forward, but Leah, standing at the back of the room, recorder in hand, stepped into his path. "Careful, Darren," she said coldly. "Evidence never blinks." The room was electric, the air humming with tension. Darren's composure cracked. "She's lying," he shouted, voice raw. "She's unstable, she's bitter, she's trying to ruin me." And then the final card. I turned to Chloe. "Unstable, am I? Then perhaps Chloe can explain this." I pulled out the printed email she had sent me, the ink stark against the page. "Your words, Chloe. He told me she was crazy. He told me she'd give up everything quietly. But now I don't know what to believe." The blood drained from her face. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice trembling. "He said you were gone. He said you didn't matter." She turned to Darren, pulling her hand from his. "You lied to me." The room erupted. Whispers, gasps, the rustle of fabric as people leaned away from Darren and Celeste as though scandal were contagious. Darren's jaw clenched, his face twisted in rage. "You stupid girl!" He spat at Chloe before he could stop himself. The cruelty in his tone cut through the air like a blade. It was over. Celeste stepped forward, voice shrill. "This is slander, Isabella! You've orchestrated this entire charade!" But her words fell flat against the tidal wave of evidence scattered across the table. No one looked at her with admiration anymore, only disgust. I gathered my folders, slowly, deliberately letting the silence stretch. You wanted to erase me. Instead, you exposed yourselves. Tomorrow, Leah files the motions, restraining order, divorce proceedings, financial misconduct claims. And when the court sees this evidence, you won't just lose your reputation. You'll lose everything. Darren's face contorted, but he said nothing. Chloe sobbed quietly, her bracelet glinting like a shackle she couldn't shake off. Celeste's pearls seemed to choke her as her chest rose and fell in shallow gasps. I turned to the crowd, my voice steady clear. For 15 years, I was told to lower my voice, to make myself smaller. Tonight, I refuse. Tonight, I take my voice back. Applause didn't come. This was Boston society, not a courtroom drama, but the silence was louder than thunder. Every whisper, every turned head, every averted gaze was its own verdict. Darren's empire of lies had collapsed, not with a bang, but with the steady unveiling of truth. Leah touched my shoulder as I walked out, Candace slipping the recorder back into her purse. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in years, I inhaled without flinching. Behind me, the townhouse buzzed with scandal reputations crumbling like plaster. Ahead of me, the city stretched wide, lit by possibility. And I walked into it no longer erased, but blazing. By dawn, Boston was already buzzing. Word from Beacon Hill traveled faster than any official court filing ever could. The dinner that Darren and Celeste had staged as my public execution had transformed into their own spectacle of disgrace. Candace texted me a single line just after sunrise. "It's everywhere." She wasn't exaggerating. By the time I sipped my first cup of coffee, whispers had turned into headlines on local society blogs. Whitman Eyre humiliated at mother's soiree. Bruises, receipts, and a mistress half his age. Beacon Hill in shock. The details weren't all accurate, but the thrust was unmistakable. Darren's reputation was crumbling in real time. Celeste, once the queen bee of her social circle, found herself swarmed not with admirers, but with questions she couldn't spin. How could you let it get this far? Did you know? Why would you support your son against his wife? The sharp-tongued friends who once laughed at her jokes now avoided her table. By mid-morning, she had canceled 2 luncheons and retreated into silence. Darren fared even worse. His law firm, known for its pristine image, wasted no time in responding. Leah forwarded me the firm's official statement. "Mr. Grant has been placed on immediate leave pending internal investigation. Our firm does not condone misconduct of any kind." Within hours, his email was shut down, his name erased from the website. The man who once strutted on the courthouse steps was now a ghost of his own making. And Chloe, poor foolish Chloe, she didn't show up to her internship that morning. Someone spotted her crying outside a cafe near Back Bay, the diamond bracelet shoved into her purse as though it had burned her. Her friends distanced themselves quickly, whispering about the affair and the goddaughter twist with wide eyes. She was young enough to rebuild, but not without scars. My phone vibrated with missed calls, 25, then 30. Darren, Celeste. Unknown numbers, likely allies sent to convince me to be reasonable. I let them ring, I had nothing left to hear. Instead, I focused on the flood of messages that came from unexpected corners. A neighbor slipped a note under my door. Saw the news. Proud of you for standing tall. A colleague from years ago emailed, I wish I had your courage. Thank you for speaking out. Even strangers reached out on social media, their words lifting me higher than I thought possible. But it wasn't all encouragement. Darren's allies tried to spin the story, painting me as vindictive, unhinged. A post surfaced on a private Facebook group. She staged it. She's after his money. Leah's advice was firm. Do not respond. Silence is power now. Let the evidence speak louder than gossip. And she was right. Each time I felt the sting of a rumor, I reminded myself of the folders, the documents, the recordings. Evidence never blinks. Their lies would wither in the light. By the third day, the scandal had spread beyond Boston society. National outlets sniffed at the edges of the story the lawyer caught, cheating the abused wife who exposed him the betrayal involving a goddaughter. It was sensational, tragic, cinematic. And through it all, my name was no longer a whisper. It was a headline. For years, Darren and Celeste had tried to erase me. Now the world knew my story. And though the attention was overwhelming, one truth steadied me. I wasn't the one crumbling. They were. The courthouse smelled of old wood and polish, a place where history clung to every marble column and echoing step. I sat beside Leah at the petitioner's table, my folders neatly stacked, my heart pounding with a rhythm I could finally trust. This wasn't the stage Darren and Celeste had built for me. This was neutral ground, a place where truth had teeth. Darren arrived first, shoulders squared, jaw clenched, but the confidence he once carried into every room was gone. His suit seemed too tight, his eyes darting toward reporters clustered in the back row. Celeste trailed behind him, pearl necklace trembling against her throat. Chloe was absent. She had refused to testify on his behalf, a silence louder than any accusation. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a bun, called the proceedings to order. Leah rose with the calm authority of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire career. She presented the bruises, the receipts, the videos, the deed to the condo, and Chloe's email. Piece by piece, the narrative Darren had spun unraveled until only the truth remained. When Darren's lawyer attempted to object, claiming fabrication, Leah simply slid the flash drive across the table. Your Honor, the recordings are time-stamped, corroborated by witnesses. Evidence never blinks. I watched the judge's expression harden as each document passed through her hands. Finally, she turned to Darren. Mr. Grant, you stand accused not only of financial misconduct, but of physical abuse. Do you have anything to say in your defense? For the first time, Darren faltered. His mouth opened, then closed. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on the man who had once believed he was untouchable. At last, he muttered, She's exaggerating. She always exaggerates. But his voice was thin, hollow, a ghost of the arrogance he had flaunted at Celeste's dinner party. The judge's gavel struck once sharp and final. The court finds in favor of Mrs. Isabella Grant. The restraining order is granted effective immediately. The condominium remains her separate property. Mr. Grant is ordered to reimburse marital funds misused for extramarital purposes and is barred from making further claims against her assets. My breath caught. It was done. Celeste's cry of outrage echoed across the chamber, but no one turned to comfort her. Reporters scribbled furiously the weight of scandal sealing her family's downfall. Darren sank into his chair, staring at the table as though it might swallow him whole. Leah placed a steady hand over mine. You're free, Izzy. Free. The word settled into my bones like sunlight warming places that had been frozen for years. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, voices shouted my name, but I kept walking. I didn't need to speak. The evidence had spoken for me. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't surviving under Darren's shadow. I was standing in my own light. That night, I returned to my condo. Alone, but not lonely. Safe, but not silenced. I opened the trust documents again, tracing my Aunt Josephine's signature with steady fingers. She had left me more than money. She had left me freedom, foresight, the ability to choose my future. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window overlooking the harbor, and let the city lights remind me that life still shimmered beyond betrayal. The scars on my arm would fade. The bruises on my heart would heal. And tomorrow I would begin building something new, something mine. For now, though, I savored the quiet, the peace, the undeniable truth. Justice was mine. 6 months later, my condo no longer felt like a battlefield. The folders and evidence that once covered my dining table had been replaced with manuscripts, sketches, and bright sticky notes scrawled with ideas. The bruises had faded, the silence had softened. What remained was the steady hum of a new life I had built piece by piece. With Aunt Josephine's trust as my foundation, I launched something I had once only dreamed of: a small publishing house focused on women's voices, memoirs of survival poetry from women who had been told to hush essays from mothers, daughters, sisters who had carved strength from pain. I named it Thunderpress after her words to me. There's a strength in silence, Izzy, but one day you'll need to turn that silence into thunder. Every morning, I arrived at the bright loft office in seaport sunlight streaming through wide industrial windows. Veterans of the industry sat alongside interns fresh out of college, all of us bound by the same mission to give voice to the unheard. The work filled me in a way I hadn't thought possible, each published story another stitch mending the fabric of my own life. Leah remained by my side, not just as my lawyer, but as my board chair and confidant. Candace ran our communications, her camera now turned toward campaigns that celebrated resilience instead of recording abuse. And Chloe, surprisingly, had reached out her voice, soft with shame. She wanted to volunteer to help other young women avoid the mistakes she had made. I didn't forgive her instantly, but I did let her try. Watching her shelve books in our office, eyes bright with the hope of redemption, I realized that even those who hurt us can choose to walk a different road. Darren faded into obscurity. His license to practice law was suspended indefinitely after the misconduct claims. Celeste retreated from society, her pearls gathering dust in a locked jewelry box. For years they had tried to shrink me to convince the world I was nothing. And yet, in their absence, I grew taller. On the anniversary of the courthouse ruling, I hosted a launch party for our first anthology. Women stood at the podium, voices trembling, then steadying as they read stories of nights they thought would end them, of mornings they rose anyway. I listened from the back, tears pricking my eyes, and knew that my survival was no longer just mine. It was a thread woven into a larger tapestry. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed and the city lights flickered awake beyond the glass windows, I took a deep breath of the cool air. The weight of Darren's shadow no longer pressed against me. The fear of Celeste's voice no longer echoed in my ears. The silence of my condo no longer felt like exile. I was free. And freedom was not just survival, it was creation. I thought of the women who might one day read our books, who might see themselves in the stories and realize they too could reclaim their lives. That was my legacy, greater than any trust fund, greater than any courtroom victory. As I locked the office door and stepped into the night, the harbor air sharp against my cheeks, I whispered the words I had carried through every stage of my battle: evidence never blinks. But neither does hope. And with that, I walked forward, no longer erased, no longer silenced, but blazing in the truth of who I had become.